Hello, thank you for clicking on this video. My name is Heidi, and in this video I want to talk about all the books I've read so far in 2020. By showing you all these books, I think it will help for you to get to know the types of books I like to read. I won't be going into too much detail about each book, just saying if I liked it, why I did, or why I didn't, and then I'll just give you my 5-star rating. Before I get into all the books that I have read, I do want to talk a little bit about my reading goals I made for this year. I like to read more for the enjoyment. I don't want to put pressure on how many books I'm reading. I just want to read good books. If you see on my Goodreads, it's gonna say my goal for this year is 52, which I don't know if it's gonna happen or not, but we'll see. So enough about that. Let's just get into the books I have currently read so far. So the first book I read, I started off really well, and I read Beartown by Fredrik Backman. I gave this a 5 out of 5. There's a lot of hockey talk in this book. I know I'm not crazy into sports. I know nothing about hockey, but I didn't mind it too much. Part of it I think was the writing style. It was really well written, and I think part of it at the time, my husband was coaching hockey, so he would talk about hockey, he would talk about the kids. It didn't bother me while I was reading the book how much hockey was talked about. The author really did a very good job with keeping me thinking about the book. I was thinking about it when I put it down. I wanted to continue reading and see what was going to happen. It's about a town and their response to a very serious incident that happened. It shows everyone reacting or responding to what happens. This book has a lot of emotion in it. It made me angry, it made me sad. It was very well written. I think I would really love if I had read with someone, because there's just so many discussions to have at the end of this book. So this was a really, really strong read, a really good one to start with. The next book was The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh. I was really excited to get into vampires, but I was hoping for a lot of vampire vibes in it. This book kind of disappointed me a little bit. I think the biggest thing was the ending. I think the ending just happened so quickly and I don't even remember what happened. I think I expected so much from this book that in a way I was kind of turned down by it. I have big hopes for the second book. I've been debating on if I want to read it or not. I don't know, halfway through the book I just realized I wasn't enjoying it so much, so I think I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. So the next book I read, I don't have it with me, and that is the first Harry Potter book. I never read the Harry Potter books. I remember the storyline from the movies. I read it all in one day, pretty quickly. I gave that a 3 out of 5 stars. So the next book I read was Fire by Kristin Cashore. This was the second book from the Graceling. I thought this book was gonna follow through with the Graceling story, but it was very different with different characters, a different storyline. Did like Graceling a lot more than I did this one. Actually, I bought Graceling and Fire at the same time, and I read Graceling right away. I don't know why it took me so long to read this one, but I finally did, and I think the best part was the prologue in this book. It's like 16 pages long. It's so good. I know there's a third book, it's Bitter Blue. I don't know if I'm gonna read that one or not. I don't have the book, so I may not for quite a long time, but we'll see. If I end up getting the book, if I see it for a good price, I probably will end up reading it. This one was really, really good. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Right after that, I started reading Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. I actually listened to the audiobook. It was so, I loved it. I wish I had the book just to read it again. I gave that a 5 out of 5 stars. I think that's I'd call that more like a psychological horror book. I think I'm realizing I'm really into that kind of genre. I don't know if I like any other kinds of horror, but the psychological horror is really, really what I'm into. I can't read too much of it, but I really enjoy it. And then we're moving on to Kill a Mockingjay by Harper Lee. I didn't read this in high school. I think everybody read this in school. I don't know why I wasn't assigned to read it. I felt very out of the loop with everybody saying this was one of their favorite books, so I felt I just had to read it. Everybody's read it. I haven't. I just want to read it and see if I like it as well. So me not knowing what it was at all, it was a little difficult to get into. So I ended up reading and listening to the audio at once, and that really helped me get into the story. It was really well done. I wish I had read it as well in school. Yeah, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. For our next book, I ended up reading Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This book follows a main character, Mia, which is driven for revenge for what happened to her and her family. You follow her going to the Red Church to train to be an assassin. I'm not actually too sure if I really enjoyed the way it was written. I felt that I was envisioning the author so much throughout the book, the way it was written. I don't really like to envision an author writing the book as I'm reading the book, and I felt I was doing that a lot with this book. Very uniquely written. I didn't so much like the footnotes it had. I did like quite a few of the characters. I liked Tris. Actually, throughout the book, I was wishing that he had been the main character than Mia, but in the end, I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. So the next book I ended up getting into was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I thought I would absolutely love this one because I have heard so many people adore these books. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. I thought the pacing was pretty slow at the beginning, but towards the end, I enjoyed the most. I have like a love-hate relationship with this book. There were so many aspects I loved about this book and so many I didn't. I really don't care about the romance in her novels. I wish it wasn't there too much or at all sometimes. And this series I knew was gonna have a lot of the romance. This was a 3 out of 5 star, but it was a good 3 out of 5 star. So getting out of fantasy, I ended up reading Lock Every Door by Riley Sagar. This book was really good. I'm really glad that I got this book. It's one of those psychological horrors, I'd say, again, so that's probably why I loved it so much. Yeah, I think I'm gonna be reading more of his books, but this one was really popular. I heard it everywhere, so gave this one a try. Probably gonna give more of his books a try. Oh, I gave this a 5 out of 5. The next book I read was called See Me by Hailey Rodgers. This book I actually got from the author. She reached out to me on Instagram and sent me the digital copy. There were different success stories in every chapter. I thought this was really well done. It made me think of myself as a young adult, growing to the expectations of your elders, and realizing that you may not find, your true self by doing so. And I thought this was really interesting to read the many different people that she had interviewed and talked with. And towards the end, she talked about herself, which I thought was really nice to hear. I really enjoyed this book. I honestly didn't think I'd enjoy it as much as I did. I thought it was really well done. After that book, I read the second Harry Potter book, which is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This was so much better than the first one. The beginning was kind of slow until towards the end it picked up a little bit. Really fun to read, really liked it. This was so far as I got in the Harry Potter series, so I hope to read the third one sometime soon, hopefully this year. I've heard many things that the third one's better, the third one's the best one, or that the fourth one's the best one. Anyway, I'm really excited to see where this goes, if I will actually like reading this or if I'll like it as much as everybody else is liking it. We'll see. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book I read was The Four Agreements, Practical Guide to Personal Freedom. What? Did I really read that? I don't remember reading this. I don't remember reading this much at all, but I did give it a 5 out of 5 stars, so it must have been really good. These were books I was really trying to challenge myself to not stay into reading fantasy books or YA fantasy books. So I ended up reading that on my phone while I was trying to fall asleep. I must have just been up all night just reading it, not being able to sleep, but yeah, it's probably one of those books I should probably end up reading a second time just to really fully get and not read it too quickly. After that, I read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. This was really, I remember reading this one. This was a really good book. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. If I had to recommend a book, I would recommend this book, definitely. By the end of it, you're very inspired to do all the creative things you have been thinking for a really long time. I believe this is the same author that wrote Pray, Eat, Love. I would suggest people who are going into writing or wanting to become an author, I would suggest this one very highly. This really helped motivate me into wanting to do more and more creative things that I have been wanting to do for a long time. If you're ever down, get the audiobook as well. I listened to the audiobook and then bought the book. Back into fantasy, I ended up reading Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. Definitely better than the first one. Huge compared to the first one. I ended up giving this one I think I ended up giving this one a 3 out of 3 as well. I don't know why, but I like this one better. I think it was the romance. That's probably why I'm not too crazy about the romance. But the next book I read or listened to was The Diviners by Libba Bray. This one was really well done. I actually really liked the narrator of the book. There are quite a few supernatural things going on in this book. There were quite a few, I'd say, horror scenes. I'm not sure if you'd consider this a horror. I wish I had the actual book. It took me quite a while to get through this one just because it was so long, and I was just listening to the audiobook, so I would only turn it on when I was cleaning. As the story was getting going, it was really, really good. Definitely want to keep going with that series. I gave that book a 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I ended up reading was The Whisper Man by Alex North. This was a thriller book. This one was a really good one. I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars. So it's just following the story of this little boy and his dad who are struggling through the relationships between the two. I thought they were really cute together. This story actually made me really creeped out a little bit. I read it during the night, so as I'm reading, I'm kind of like making sure to lock all the doors and make sure all the windows are closed. It did scare me quite a bit while reading it, but all in all, it was really, really good book. Following that, I ended up reading One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. It started off in a detention, and I felt like there was a very like stereotype to each character. There was like the jock, there was the popular pretty girl, the really smart girl, and then there was the bad boy. There was a murder in the school. As these 4 characters were, facing their own challenges through life that they had, they were suspects of murder for this one student that was also in detention with them. I read this all in one day. Throughout the book, I was thinking it was a 4 out of 5 stars, but towards the end, it kind of made it a 3 out of 5 stars, which isn't too bad, but I was quite disappointed how it all ended. Moving on, I ended up listening to the audio of A Man Named Ova by Fredrik Backman. I read this book mainly for the author. The topic was quite heavy. It was like a sad comedy type of, like a sad comedic type of story, I would say, in some situations. Overall, I ended up I think I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. The topics that he writes about, what I've noticed so far, are very intense. So if I'm not willing to go through with those types of situations or topics, I may stay away for a bit of time before I read them. But again, the book was really well done. Following that, I ended up reading Shatter Me. I felt so out of the loop. Like, everyone has read this book so far years ago, so I'm kind of late to the game. I didn't end up liking this book. I thought I really would, because the beginning was so strong. It started off with a character. She was confined, and we don't know where she is, why she's there. And the way it was written was kind of like poetic, so I didn't mind it at first. But as the story continued, it did quite bother me how poetic it was. I ended up giving this a I think it was a 2 out of 5 stars. Really good start, but the execution wasn't too great. The following book I had listened to was Three Women by Lisa Taddeo. Exactly as the title says, does follow 3 women in their sex lives. I thought this was a really interesting book to read. Again, I think this is another book that would be really well for a book club to discuss. I think I really enjoyed this one and ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. I'm going back into fantasy. I had, I think this was towards quarantine. When quarantine started, I wasn't reading as much. I thought I would read so much more than I did. In quarantine, I ended up watching The Witcher. Really liked the CG of all the monsters in it. Really good beginning scene, I thought. So, and then my husband was saying that, it's based off a video game, and then, it's based off a book. So obviously I'm gonna look for that book. I read The Last Wish. So I ended up giving that a 5 out of 5. No, I ended up giving that a 4 out of 5 star. Moving on, I ended up reading the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying a Vampire. I listened to the audio, so good. It was a psychological horror I didn't know I was missing out on. Our main character being the mother, who is Patricia, and she is a part of a book club, and she doesn't really enjoy it, so they end up forming their own book club of a true crime book club. It's not a typical vampire book, but it's done really well to get like vampire vibes. I would really recommend. 10 out of 10, 5 stars, 5 out of 5 stars. After that, I ended up reading One of Us Is Next by Karen M. McManus. This one was the second book to One of Us Is Lying. It did not follow the same characters, which was kind of a bummer. I didn't enjoy this book as well as I did the first book. I didn't really care for what happened throughout the book. I don't know. I didn't like it as much as I did the first book. I ended up giving this one, and I didn't like, the ending was not great either. It wasn't believable. I just really didn't like this book either. I thought that it was worse than the first one, so I ended up giving this one a 2 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I have recently read or listened, actually this one was an audio book as well, and that was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Jenkins Reid. I really like this book. I don't really read books that are of characters who are famous or like celebrities, but this one I really like. I'm more into watching documentaries when it comes to celebrities than reading stories or fiction books. So I was pleasantly surprised and happy with the way this book was, and I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And those are all the books I've read so far for this year. I think it's quite a good amount of books that I've read. I have quite a few books that I've started so far, so hopefully I can get them done soon. I hope you enjoyed watching. Let me know if you have read any of the books I read this year. Did you think the same thing? Did you like them? Did you not like them? Thank you so much for watching.